Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to someone who needs no introduction, but I will do so anyways. His name is Decius, and are you drunk? He's drunk, which means he's ready to rant. And when Decius is drunk, he rants very well. So at this point, I will turn the floor over to Decius, and make sure the camera is pointing at him because somebody touched it. And we'll get this report.
All right. How's everyone doing?
Somebody moved the whole thing.
My name is Decius, and I'm drunk.
Yeah!
There's this guy named Batman around here, and he knows more about 802.11 than anyone that we've ever met, and I don't care anymore.
For what?
He's got a breathalyzer.
We need to find out the date.
And I scored .11 about 2 hours ago, and I have a loss on Saturday. And I'm really fucking pissed off.
Okay, we'll see.
And I'm giving a little rant. A drunken rant. So what do you guys think of Verisign? Fuck fucking Verisign! I'm going to talk about Verisign, and then I'm going to talk about Diebold. What do you guys think of Diebold? A couple people know what's up with Diebold. Yeah, everyone knows. Fucking bastards. A lot of motherfucking assholes up in this shit.
Let's go!
So, Sco's some motherfuckers too. Sco's definitely some motherfuckers, but I'm not going to talk about that because I don't have time. I'm going to talk about Diebold, I'm going to talk about Verisign. So let's start with Verisign. As most of you know, on September 15th, Verisign deployed a wild card in the .com and .net domains. They are responsible for managing the servers for those domains, the DTLD servers for those domains. In the past, when you looked at the domain that was not registered, you would get an error message called rcode 3, which said there is no domain here. In bind terminology, this is called NX domain. After September 15th, for a short period of time, instead of getting that, you would get a wildcard response, which provided an IP address for this search engine, which is known as SiteFinder. So this fucking sucks. And there's a lot of people who've made very technical arguments about this and why it sucks. We went through about 3 or 4 harrowing days where, really nothing was done about this, and everyone was kind of pissed off. Paul Dixie, who maintains Bind, which is the most popular DNS server, released a patch which allows you to prevent TLDs from distributing one of these wildcard entries. And a number of ISPs implemented this patch. And, so if you were fortunate enough to have one of those ISPs, you did not see SiteFinder very long. The rest of us were stuck with it until, ICANN, which is the quasi-governmental entity which is supposed to regulate the DNS system, told Verisign, or asked Verisign very nicely, in fact, to stop it until we had time to assess its impact. And Verisign said, I think we should talk about this and figure out what its impact is before we shut it off. This is, them being an asshole point number 1, of which there will be many. Usually, when you deploy something on a network, you figure out what its impact is before you deploy it, and not afterward.
What's testing?
What?
What's testing?
What's testing?
Testing just slows down the development.
Yeah, seriously, we need to innovate here. That wasn't it. That didn't happen. We need to innovate, and all this testing and all this verification that we're not fucking up fundamental infrastructure is holding us back. We need to think past that. Whatever. So, after a few days more, ICANN summarily told Verisign that they would sue the shit out of them if they didn't simply shut it down immediately. At which point Verisign blinked. But a lot of people aren't following this story closely. They didn't blink and say, okay, fine, you're right, we're going to shut it off, we're not going to turn it back on. What they said is we will temporarily shut it down so that we can have a discussion about it. And ICANN has had 2 meetings in Washington to discuss the impact of this change on the infrastructure. This is where I really get pissed off, because they're really into this. During these two meetings, VeriSign basically showed up and said there's no problem. There are no infidels in Baghdad. Everything's fine. And this bureaucratic process that we have with ICANN, it's slowing stuff down. We really need to deploy this stuff. At the same time, in the press, they were writing essays and doing interviews that got published in very key news media locations such as news.com, where they said things like, all these people that are opposed to this, they're technical zealots. Their opinions are insignificant and they're operating emotionally and they don't really understand what the impact of this is. None of these problems that we have are significant, and at the same time, these people, they're not thinking objectively and they're opposed to innovation. And I mean, geez, man, they're being dicks. I'm myself not sure.
Tomatoes.
So, tomatoes. Who said tomatoes? You get fucking 10 points. Because one of VeriSign's technical people showed up at NANOG last weekend. Who knows what NANOG is? A couple people. NANOG is the North American Network Operators Group, which is basically 500 people that run large internet networks. They all get together, all the engineers from the large ISPs like AT&T, Bell Canada, WorldCom, Internet, all that shit. They all get together on a tri-annual basis to talk about what operational things are happening on the internet and how they can respond to them, and in terms of how they architect the fundamental backbones and the peering locations. These motherfuckers showed up with tomatoes. All 500 of these people showed up with tomatoes. And, they're being very respectful. They didn't want to throw tomatoes at the VeriSign representative because actually many of them were trying to hire him out. They want to get rid of this company's best and brightest because they are a problem. But they stacked the tomatoes up in front of the podium. But these people that run the internet, they're zealots. They are opposed to innovation. They don't like technology, and they're bad people. And we really shouldn't pay much attention to them. That's the thing. VeriSign isn't really talking to us, and they're not talking to NANOG and they're not talking to the IT community in general when they're talking to the press. They're talking to the politicians. And they made very clear arguments that management of the DNS system needs to be removed from the government and needs to be placed into a competitive marketplace where people can innovate. And, they have some actually fairly legitimate arguments. How many people think there should be more TLDs?
No.
Like .com, .net. Should there be .geek?
.hacker!
.hacker? I mean, I think there should be. I'm kind of ticked off about the fact that there aren't more TLDs, and, ICANN kind of sucks. Up until this point, I've never found myself really caring about ICANN and really backing them. So, I mean, that's valid, but the problem is that the way they're going about it is not necessarily... I mean, they claim that they're talking about innovation, and they claim they're talking about having a market that finds, better solutions to problems that the people on the internet really want. But that's not really what they're doing. Their actions are not the same as their words. The thing is that you can use SiteFinder right now, even though it's shut down. You can take Mozilla 1.5, which recently got released, and you can install it on your PC, and it allows you to set up a search engine that you check if you have a domain that doesn't get resolved. So you can set SiteFinder.verisign.com as that search engine, and you can use VeriSign, and it works or you can use SiteFinder, and it works just fine. The question is not whether or not we're letting VeriSign deploy the SiteFinder service, and the question is not whether or not we're allowing people to innovate with the infrastructure. The question is whether or not we have to use this service, whether we like it or not. And the question is also whether or not VeriSign should have maybe notified people before they were going to change fundamental infrastructure. It's really bad. So these folks have published They did a study. They went around and interviewed a lot of internet users, and apparently 85% of internet users prefer SiteFinder to the error message they were getting before. That's what they said. Rick Wesson gave them some hell at the second ICANN meeting in Washington, and he asked, could you provide the raw data from this study to the public so we can take a look at this study and determine, whether or not We agree with the conclusions that you drawn from this information that you collected. You know, what were the questions that you asked? What did people really respond with? And what might you say about that? Well, you know what? They decided that this was proprietary information they can't provide it to the public. So you know, it used to be that if you typed, if you were telnetting to a host on your network and you mistyped the domain name, you would get a message that said, host not found, host does not exist. Now, or rather, when SiteFinder was deployed, what happens when you telnet to a host on your network and you mistype the domain name is that you wait for 2 minutes for your program to time out because it gets an IP result and it sits there and tries to connect to it. So I think what's important here is that this really, you know, that technical flaw that I'm explaining, you know, they've gone out in public, they've gone in the press, they're talking to the government. And if you go on Yahoo, Yahoo's message board for VRSN, which is their stock ticker symbol, and you go back a few days, you're going to find this guy that posted all of the political action committee contributions that people who are executives at VeriSign made in the last, few months. They've been contributing a lot of money to various people who are politically powerful in the Senate and in the House. They're talking to these people, and they're saying, you know, we didn't cause any technical problems. You know, there really isn't any problem with what we did. At the same time, they have this whole website where they talk about how to port their software and interoperate with the changes they made. What's really important about this is that it's not really about SiteFinder, and it's not really about the change they made. It's about who gets to make a decision about what changes get made. It's the fact that VeriSign decided unilaterally that they were going to make this change to the infrastructure, and they deployed it. And their opinion is that it's RFC compliant, and you know, nobody has the right to tell us no, and we don't have to notify anybody. And the really isn't. It's about who controls how the internet works. And what's really important about that is that if someone can deny your right to have a DNS name, they essentially deny your right to exist on the internet. If you can't have a domain name, if your website, if you're saying things that they disagree with, and they can sort of shut off resolution for your domain, you know, they've censored your site. And the reality is that that's extremely important. That's a lot of power, and it needs to be managed in a way that's democratic. And SiteFinder's, or rather VeriSign's answer to that problem is probably the least democratic answer that you can possibly imagine. This is a company that has monopolistic, control over this service. That's deploying things like SiteFinder, which, I mean, if they really wanted innovation, if they really wanted a competitive marketplace in which people could decide on different solutions, they wouldn't have deployed a wildcard. They just said install Mozilla. They're sort of forcing you to see the internet the way they want to see it, in the way that is most financially valuable to them. ICANN is a little bit better, to the extent that the Department of Commerce controls ICANN, and therefore we elect representatives which go into the Department of Commerce, and they, get to make decisions, and, maybe they provide ICANN funding and maybe they don't. There is some vague degree of democratic legitimacy. There's a big problem with the fact that it's controlled by the United States, because there's a lot of other countries that care about the internet. None of those countries really have an impact. ICANN attempted to hold democratic elections a few years ago and failed. So, I mean, ICANN definitely has problems, but ICANN is certainly preferable to being fastest. So, I don't know. There's basically, I don't know, the question that I have essentially is, what should we do about this? And one of the things we can do is not buy products from VeriSign. I mean, these people are out there. I mean, how many people in here have a problem with this? How many people think that SiteFinder sucks? Almost everybody in this room. Do you think that there is a legitimate reason that it should be shut down? I mean, how many people think that it seriously should be shut down? Almost everybody in this room. Now, when I say shut down, I don't mean shutting down SiteFinder. I mean shutting down the wildcard. You know what I'm saying? It's perfectly reasonable to access SiteFinder over Mozilla, in my opinion. I don't care. It's the wildcard that I think needs to be taken out. Almost everyone in this room thinks the wildcard needs to be taken out. You know what? You guys are a bunch of technical zealots. Your opinions are totally insignificant. You're right. Bullshit. Why do business with a company that thinks that your opinions are irrelevant? That you're a bunch of technical zealots. Don't do business with these people. I needed an S-MINE certificate on Thursday for a very bizarre reason. And I went in Outlook, you can say, you know, I need an S-Line certificate. It takes you to this little webpage that Microsoft runs that allows you to buy an S-Line certificate. And there was only one company listed on this website. It was VeriSign. And I was like, fuck, if I'm going to give these motherfuckers money. So I went on and I did some searches. I got on Google and I found this company called GeoTrust. And I bought my S-Line certificate from them. And it works perfectly fine. And, you know, their customer service was very courteous. I dealt with them, you know, absolutely 2 thumbs up. They did a great job. And they're not fucking VeriSign. So, you know, if you need certificates, if you need S-Line or like website SSL certificates, don't fucking buy them from these bastards. Network solutions is kind of an interesting element. You know, when this thing first got deployed, a lot of people said, fuck you, I'm transferring my domain away from Network Solutions because Network Solutions was previously owned by VeriSign. They sold it a week ago. Now, they still own a 15% portion of the company. So selling or getting rid of your Network Solutions domain still actually hurts VeriSign. But the thing is, there's a very particular reason why they sold it. Most of the regulations on VeriSign's management of the .NET and .com TLDs come from the idea that they are in fact a network. They're in fact a registrar as in addition to a registry. They actually allow, you know, people can buy .com, .net domains from them. So they have to run an anti-competitive service where all the other companies that sell .com, .net domains have equal access to the registry that they have. The thing is that, like, if they sell Network Solutions and they no longer are selling .com and .net registries, then they don't have a conflict of interest. There's no competitive issues here. So a lot of the regulations that prevent them from being a bastard may go away. So, you know, yes, sell your Network Solutions domains, but, you know, they sold it, and it's kind of interesting. And they will probably go back to ICANN and argue that because we aren't a registrar anymore, we don't really need to be too concerned about anti-competitive interest. We're independent. We don't have any conflict of interest here. If you are looking for a job, which some of you are because the economy still fucking sucks, don't go work for these bastards. If you are, in fact, if you have a job and you have the opportunity to hire people, hire their engineers away. And this was suggested on that. There's some very good engineers at VeriSign. They're very good people. And they can't just leave because the economy sucks. And they have house payments to make. They've got cars to pay for. They have families to take care of. If you can hire somebody out of VeriSign, hire them out. But the most important thing here, unfortunately, is to prepare for the internet to fragment. Right now, if I tell you my website is such and such.com and you resolve it, the reality is that you're going to get the same website that everyone else thinks you can get. But the fact is that if VeriSign gets away with this and they get to redeploy SiteFinder, a lot of people are simply not going to use ICANN's DNS system anymore. There are alternatives. One of them is called OpenNIC. I don't necessarily think that OpenNIC is much better than ICANN because it's not as carefully managed as I would want. But you can point your result.conf in your machine at OpenNIC DNS servers, and they have .geek. Which is kind of neat. You can register a .geek domain, and you can still see .com, and still see .net. But you know, you can do all this other stuff too. You can rest assured that these guys are going to filter out stuff that VeriSign does that they don't want. And you're going to definitely see this a lot more if the entire DNS system ends up getting handed off to VeriSign, which is certainly what they want, which is what they're fighting very hard for, and which we certainly have the capability to make happen. So we're going to end up with a fragmented internet. We're going to end up with a couple of different DNS systems, and you can't see one side of the other. And you know, we need to be prepared to essentially select the DNS system that represents values that we think are reasonable. And we need to be prepared for the fact that, you know, it's going to come like Macs and PCs. Some people, you know, really use the software. Sometimes it runs on PCs, sometimes it runs on Macs, sometimes it runs on Unix machines, whatever. It's split. And if you have one computer, you're only going to be able to use one, you know, some of the software, not all of it. That's the future we're heading towards. It's fucking frustrating. I'm pissed off about it. And the only way to avoid that future is to number one, don't do business with these fuckers. Number two, you know, hire people out of there now. And, you know, number three, I mean, if you have the opportunity to comment on this stuff with respect to the press, you know, they've done a very good job of spinning in the press that they're totally reasonable, they're capitalists, they're doing the right thing, and, you know, they're deploying, you know, very innovative, valuable services, and, all these technical zealots are trying to shut them down. Take the opportunity to correct the press. Take the opportunity to correct the politicians that that are making these decisions. Because it's fucking bullshit. I'm pissed off about it. All right. So that was number one. Number two is evil. Boom. Okay, you guys so, hold on, what?
Who don't you want to vote for today?
Seriously. Okay, so you guys seem to react less to people. You don't know as much about this. It is a bank machine, exactly. These are the guys who build ATMs. But they also build, and incidentally, I don't know, I'm fond of saying Diebold because I want these fucking people to die. But it's actually pronounced Diebold. Their slogan is never say die. So how many of you have voted within the last 10 years? A lot. A fair amount. Okay. So did you vote electronically? I mean, you guys remember all this drama in Florida a couple of years ago when they had this Penny Chad, system where these people were voting with this antiquated machine that lets you punch this piece of paper? Well, they have, very advanced voting technology now where you've got this computer system with this GUI and you get to, touch screen on the candidate that you want to vote for. The problem with these systems is that, essentially there's no way to prove that the person that you touched on the screen is actually the person that it registered to vote for. Additionally, the problem with these things is that they're Windows machines, and they're connected to networks. And what's worse, in some cases, they're connected to the internet. Seriously. Okay. So, what? Seriously. Yeah, okay, so I'll talk about patching first of all. They have a lot of bureaucratic procedures that go around the management of these computers. They want to make sure, they're trying to make sure that these are legitimate voting machines. So what happens is that when there's a new patch for, say, Microsoft's operating system, it has to be verified by a federal government agency, and then in some cases verified by a state agency before it can be deployed on the computers in question. So as much as I respect the fact that they're attempting to prevent patches that actually break the voting, on the other hand, you can rest assured that any voting machine used in an election has security vulnerabilities because it's not patched up to date. Because this whole verification process takes a while. So, let me give you an example. In Maryland, the state of Maryland decided to audit the electronic voting machines that they had. They bought voting machines from a company called Diebold. And I focus on, Diebold is not the only company producing electronic voting machines, and they're not necessarily the only company with a problem. People seem to be focused on them for two reasons. One is that they're particularly malicious in terms of how they handle this problem, and two is that their source code got leaked on the internet. One guy named Avi Rubin, who's actually he's an editor for IEEE Security and Privacy, which is a very well-respected engineering magazine on computer security issues, did an audit of their source code and published a very interesting paper, which is on the net, sort of cataloging all the security flaws in the software that they've got that you're voting with. And, as a result, he's kind of been, muddied in the press. And, if you talk to people that aren't clued about computer security, it's apparently a very bad name. Anyway, the state of Maryland runs these Diebold voting machines, and they decided to get the machines audited. They wanted to know if their voting system was secure. Now, I respect that. And actually, I think that every state in this union needs to have computer security professionals audit their electronic voting system. And that's the right thing to do. The problem is that they sort of managed it poorly, and it also turned out that their voting system was one of the most insecure that I've ever heard of. SAIC did the audit of Maryland's voting system, and you can actually get the audit up on the internet, and you can read it. Now, you don't get the complete copy, you get a highly censored version, and if you think about the stuff which I'm about to tell you, which is the stuff that they made public, and you consider what sort of things they didn't make public, you really got to be worried. Basically, you've got this voting terminal that you go to that you vote on. You vote on this terminal, and then what happens is there's a PCM CIA card in the voting terminal that they pull out at the end of the day. They take this PCMCIA card to a central computer, and that computer tabulates the votes for all of the computers in that particular district. Then that computer in Maryland makes a call over a POTS line to a dial-up with no encryption and uploads the results that it tabulated. Those results are official results, which are tabulated by a central computer called the GEMS system. That system is connected to the internet. What's more, the ballot, there's this file that gets distributed from the GEMS system back to the individual voting machines, which is the ballot. It says what candidates are in the election, and it puts them in a particular order. If you, according to Abby Rubin's paper, if you rearrange the candidates in this file, you can manipulate the election. Because all it really stores is candidate 1, 50 votes, candidate 2, 3,000 votes. So candidate 1 used to be the Republican Party, now it's the Democratic Party. That kind of changes the results.
Socialist Party.
So, anyways, this file was distributed over FTP.
Not TFTP.
Oh, God. So basically, like, this is security 101 stuff. I mean, no encryption. I think there probably was a firewall in front of this computer that was connected to the internet that was doing the official vote tabulation, but, there were probably ports that were open. So, as much as I respect Maryland for actually having the balls to audit this stuff, man, that's really bad.
Are they still using it?
Oh, yeah. In fact, Maryland's election representative, their elections administrator, said, there are some problems that we discovered during this audit, and we're going to have them all resolved by November. Okay, these guys are transmitting the goddamn ballot over FTP. Okay, they didn't even get that right. We're not even talking about like what buffer overflow exploits they have in their code or like what other kinds of problems they have, right? They don't even realize that you should encrypt the fucking ballot. They're going to have all these problems fixed by November. Furthermore, Diebold, which is the company that sold them the equipment that they're actually using, this company put out a press release saying that this SAIC audit demonstrates the unprecedented level of computer security that their technology is providing for the state of Maryland.
Did they read it?
Dude, seriously, I want some of this stuff that they're smoking because it sounds really good. Jesus Christ.
Well, I guess they're right. They didn't specify how unprecedented.
Exactly, it's unprecedented. Probably is unprecedented. Which is really bad. Oh my God. So basically, like anybody in this room can manipulate an election in the United States. Absolutely. It is not hard.
Joe for president in 2004.
Seriously. It's not hard to do this.
Johnny X for president.
So quit ranting about that, and we can fix the ICANN and VeriSign problem, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, We should replace the Department of Commerce. We simply do VeriSign to operate with us.
People, take over. Do it right.
Jeez. So, okay, it gets worse. There were a bunch of memos where it was basically like an email list where a bunch of people who work for Diebold people were talking of Diebold. We're talking about like managing these election systems, operational issues, right? They've got people in the field that are running these computers. They want to know, what's going on, like how do we fix this bug that we have, right? Just like any other software company. So they're talking about this stuff, and they're talking about the password on the database. There's a database. There's an MSQL, like MS Access database on the machine that their software accesses, tabulate votes, and there's no password on it. They were talking about how, that somebody had suggested that they might want to put a password on it, and there were a bunch of people like, no, don't put a password on it, because there were a bunch of people in different districts who needed to go in there and make changes to the database schema.
Oh my God.
And they're talking about this particular district in Texas that, the election administrator there did miracles with the database schema during the middle of the election. And, the reality is that they're probably not talking about anything fraudulent. They were probably talking about making shit work. At the same time, if you think about what these people have access to and what they could have done, Jeez. So they're talking about all this stuff. They're doing an email, and somebody in the company took all these emails and they posted them on the internet along with the source code, right? All this stuff being leaked. So it ended up on a couple of websites, and summarily, people sued the they provided a DMCA notice to the companies, the ISPs that provided internet access to the people that were providing this information. One of them was blackboxvoting.com, a woman named Beth Harris, which is sort of the ringleader of electronic voting concerns. She's the person that found the source code that was originally leaked from Google. Her site got shut down for a couple of days, and it went back up without the content in place. There were a couple of students who had this stuff mirrored on their website because they were pissed off about black box voting. Those guys got the NCAA notices. In particular, there's Swarthmore College. Swarthmore. Okay, Swarthmore College. Swarthmore College.
One of the 7 sister schools. One of the 7 female sister schools in the Northeast.
One of the 7 female sister schools in the Northeast. All right. Well, there are a number of students there that are very unhappy with this and have these memos posted on their website. They got DMCA notices, so they decided to set up this thing where they would change the website where the thing was posted every single day. As a result, they started providing DMCA notices to every single website administrator. At the same time, the college decided to shut off the internet access for anybody who linked to the central website, which provided the link to the place where the code was today. So, what we have here is a corporation claiming that they have a copyright on a discussion that occurred on an internal mailing list, which is evidence that they are, in fact, doing something inappropriate with our fucking elections. They're claiming they have a copyright on this discussion, which is in fact possibly evidence of their malfeasance in operating our elections. And they're claiming that because they have a copyright, it is illegal for you to take this information and provide it on your website, and so that people can think about whether or not they want these people to be operating in systems that are the infrastructure on which our elections are based. And they're using the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to shut down the websites where this information is made available without any sort of oversight from a court. If there is any reason at all that the fair use exception was created in our law for copyright, this is the reason. We cannot run a society in which anybody who can claim that they have a copyright on evidence of their malfeasance and therefore eliminate it from the network so that nobody can talk about it.
Open your eyes.
I'm drunk. I do not talk around. I'll open my eyes if I want to. You work for Verisign, don't you?
My question is, has anyone stood up to them on this and said, fuck you?
Yes, somebody has. One of the ISPs that got this DMCA notice said, fuck you, and the EFF is backing them. So there is a backing support.
If you don't, and SC2600 will host it if we get a copy.
I can make that happen.
We'll do it.
Okay.
servers that are standing by.
Anybody that wants to talk about hosting, if you have a talk, after the talk, and we'll talk about it. But, essentially what I believe is that there ought to be a law against using tools like the DMCA notice and other similar things, the general copyright law, to sequester constitutionally protected speech. There ought to be a law against this. It is absolutely obvious, it's totally clear that the concept of criticism and comment in terms of fair use applies to this particular instance when you're talking about a company's malfeasance in managing the election system. That is what these exceptions are for. And the people that work, the lawyers that work at Google, they absolutely know this, but you cannot read this law without getting this. This is totally clear. But they're getting on the fact, and they're right, that the school does not have the balls to take them on in court, and that the students do not have the resources to take them on in court. And as a result, they're successfully censoring this information. And there ought to be a law. There ought to be punitive damages for people who abuse intellectual property law in this way. That's my take. So what time is it? It's 8:36. In my drunkenness, I have ranted too quickly, and therefore I only consumed a half hour.
Questions and answers.
I want to make one point clear. Fuck Vericide. Fuck evil. I know, what can we do? Fuck the DMCA. Fuck the DMCA. Well, before I get to questions, I want to make one more comment, and that is that there is a couple ways that people are attempting to respond to this. One of the things is the IEEE. How many people here are IEEE members? 1, 2. God damn. How many people here are engineers of some sort? A lot more. What the fuck? IEEE
Sucks in a lot of colleges.
Does it?
Yeah,
well, dude, no, what it means, it's just...
Cincinnati, it's full of a bunch of idiots who have no idea what they're doing.
all right. So, nevertheless, the United States government has asked the IEEE to come up with a standard for secure voting machines. And there's a lot of people in this particular standards committee who don't think that computer security is a really important part of that standard. They put out a reference that they were going to pass as their official standard that had fundamentally incorrect ideas, like the idea that CRC is a reasonable way to verify the integrity of information when you're talking about a computer security situation. So, if you're an IEEE member, try to get involved in that working group, or try to issue public comments. That working group is a very important thing that you can do to help produce a standard that is a national standard for secure voting systems. Another thing that you can do is potentially try to influence your local government. Ask them how the voting system works in your state, and ask them, have they had computer security professionals audit the voting system? Ask them, is this information available to the public? There's one thing that I think is kind of compelling here. A lot of people have talked about having an open source voting system.
Amen.
It occurs to me that there's this sort of gray area, particularly when you talk about a computerized election system, between the law and the code. Laws are things that, sort of mediate interactions between people in a society. And when you're talking about, software that operates something like the internet, you again have this thing that sort of mediates the interaction, the relationships between people. It's very similar in a certain sense. What the law says you can and cannot do affects what you do and do not do. In the same sense that what the computer code says you can and cannot do affects what you do and do not do. Lawrence Lessig, who's a really famous attorney, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, wrote a book about the gray areas between software and law. So, check it out if you're interested in this philosophical subject. When you're talking about a piece of software which manages an election, codified inside that piece of software is the rules that determine, how the votes are counted, how they're tabulated, and ultimately who gets elected and who does not get elected. In the same way that regulations about how election administrators run an election codifies how the votes are tabulated and who wins the election and who does not win the election. You cannot have secret laws in a free society. So, in the sense that the code that runs the election system determines the way the election system works, the code is law. And therefore the code must be available so that we can understand it and we can understand what our election system consists of. And we can decide whether or not we agree with it. I don't know, I'm making kind of a roundabout philosophical argument. I'm doing it with a lot of you in my system. But I think it's very clear. There really is no difference between saying that the code for the election system is closed, that you can't read it, and saying that the laws that govern how the election is tabulated and operated are closed and you're not allowed to read them. And, these companies, one thing you have to understand is that the people that administrate these voting systems, they're not interested in this criticism because they've already made decisions to buy equipment. They said, yeah, these people machines, they're fine, we'll buy 10,000 of them and we'll deploy them across the state. And, if it turns out that they were wrong, it's their ass. So they're totally not rational about this. They're not willing to listen to reason. They will spin on this because, they don't care what the right answer is. What they care is that they are right. Similarly, people do not understand open source software. These companies think that if they provide the source code for their software, their business is fucked. They don't seem to get that, they can open the source and still, provide the equipment to do it in a reliable way and provide service for it. There's a lot to this. But they don't get it. hopefully, some progress might be made by attempting to reach out to people that run elections and educate them about what opening the source code for these systems really means, and whether or not it affects the business of running voting machines, and whether or not it affects, them politically. But anyway, whatever. That's about it. Let's have questions and answers. I know there's lots of people that want to comment. You first.
All right, so on the VeriSign thing, I run a DNS, and my DNS tables got corrupted as hell because things like, give me lots of blowjobs.com now resolves. So why can't people sue VeriSign for literally...
They can, and some people have. Big Daddy or GoDaddy, whatever the hell it is. Him Daddy, I don't know. Those guys run that. Matt Daddy, I don't know. Is it some DNS registrar? They're a registrar.
$10 domains.
Yeah, those guys sued. I don't know, whatever, they sued. There was another company, and these guys are almost as bad as VeriSign, but not quite. I kind of like what they did. It's totally wrong, but it's funny because I don't like VeriSign so much. They're one of these cheesy ass companies that has some names like Google.com. It's Google with one letter wrong, and they've got this really awful search engine they provide you with that domain. And, so they're slime balls, but they sued. And I think they totally sued just because it'll get name recognition for them. The worst case scenario is that a bunch of people find out who they are. The best case scenario is that VeriSign has to give them a bunch of money. It's really a good deal for them. Now, as much as I think they're slime, I hate VeriSign so much that I'm friends with their enemy. But, yes, some people have sued. There's another lawsuit that a lot of people have proposed that nobody's done yet, which is that VeriSign is typo squatting on your domain. You know what I'm saying? Instead of people hitting your domain, they're hitting VeriSign, and it's like a trademark problem. So if you've got a legitimate trademark on your domain, maybe you can prosecute them for trademark violation. Nobody's actually done this yet, but a lot of people seem to think that that's a reasonable case there.
Justice Nike.
Right now, right now they are. Right now they shut the service down, so you don't really have standing. However, they have said that they're going to turn it back on, and let me be very clear about this. A lot of people haven't got this. They got, it's shut down, so it's over. It's not over. These people are very smart, and they're very powerful, and they're totally committed to deploying the service, so be prepared for it to come back. When the minute they make an announcement, and they've said that they're going to give a certain period of time before they turn it back on so people can be ready, the minute they give that announcement, you can sue. And there's a lot of people that are waiting in the wings that I've heard from. I don't know. I consider it myself, but whatever. I'm just a poor lawyer. You.
How do we translate this to layman's terms so that we can help people who don't speak the way we speak understand how?
In terms of VeriSign or the voting thing?
VeriSign. Voting is a lot easier. But
okay.
In terms of the VeriSign thing, how do we make lay people?
Let me give you an example. What it seems like to me is that when we're talking about shutting down site, it's really hard. The terminology here is really tricky. It's really difficult. And when you read some of the things that their CEO writes, you can see how carefully he plays with the words that he uses, and he'll just say one thing while simultaneously saying something else. Before I made a statement, I said shutting down VeriSign. That was a bad thing for me to say. It's because I'm drunk. You have to be very clear about the terminology that you use. We don't really want to shut down VeriSign. I think our SiteFinder. SiteFinder could be a great service. Some people like it. The fact is that you can use SiteFinder right now if you install Mozilla and you set your default search engine to SiteFinder. It works fine. So the question isn't really about whether or not this service is okay. The question is whether or not we should be forced to use it. Right now, we get to choose. We get to make a decision about what we want and what we don't want. If they get to do what they want to do, we don't get a choice. We have to do what they want. And that is what we're opposed to.
SiteFinder could be only the beginning.
Oh, absolutely it is only the beginning. They made that very clear. SiteFinder is something that they brought out. Sorry, what?
I was going to say, what's to stop them from pointing this to Amazon? Amazon pays them enough.
They are going to do that. The whole business model for the search engine is that the links that show up first for your search are the guy that paid them the most money. It's not about what's the most relevant result. It's about who paid them the most money.
What's stopping them from parking on registering a domain that's constantly being mistyped out, you know, and putting some other site there.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing at all.
It's fucked up.
It is fucked up.
email addresses.
So, okay, there's a lot of conversation we have there. I mean, it's totally possible for them to collect all your email that you send to a mistyped domain. They can just collect it. They can do whatever the fuck they want with it. Now, they say that they're not going to. Let me get this guy and then we're back.
Okay, I completely disagree with the fact that they've sent this up, but it's not the first time this has happened. If you go to a .cc domain, .cc
Right.
registry,
Absolutely.
this has been, and it's been going on for several months now. The only reason why no one has noticed is because most of us don't use .cc domains on a regular basis.
Okay.
The reason why this has become a problem is because .com and .net are global, top-level domains. They are not country-specific. There are other country-specific TLDs that have been doing this for like years now. And in which case, no one really cares because how often you go to a .jp domain, how often you got .ru domain that you're telling where. No one really pays attention to these things. And the fact that the main issue, I think, in this is the fact that these, especially ComNet and ORN, are global TLDs. They belong to the entire planet. They should not be run by ICANN because ICANN is a very US-centric organization. It should be run by the entire planet because everyone on the planet uses .com or uses .net, and that is why this has not come up until now.
That's okay. The guy had two totally valid points. The first thing is that there are other domains that have wildcards. An example is .museum. There are between 100 and 1,000 domains in .museum. That's it. So if you go to a domain that's not registered in .museum, you can get an index. People are usually pretty fine with that because they understand that that's what .museum is. They understand that that's how it works. And it's kind of off on the side, and it's for a specific purpose. .com and .net are totally different from .museum in terms of the sort of people that they serve. And I think it's pretty clear that it's a different situation. The other point that he made is that, and I think I said something to this effect. ICANN is a very U.S.-centric organization. They're controlled by the U.S. Department of Commerce. VeriSign is a very U.S.-centric organization. .com, .net are not very U.S.-centric domains. And the reality is that there are other countries that have a legitimate interest in some impact on how this stuff is managed and might not even have it. And I would like to see a situation where other countries have more influence over how this stuff works. But that's a whole other situation. I mean, that's a very difficult problem. Nobody has a good solution to yet. Let me get him because he's first.
Okay, the one thing that I'm surprised you didn't mention is how VeriSign got fined heavily for sending out notices to other people.
Absolutely.
People who had registered their domain names with VeriSign sent out notices saying, you need to re-register, send us money and we'll re-register.
These guys are fucking criminals. Okay? They committed a fraudulent they engaged in a fraudulent marketing scheme. They settled. They didn't get fined exactly. They settled with the FTC within, actually the thing was a few days after SiteFinder went live. Question. Me and you.
I was just going to say that I remember right after ICANN came down on VeriSign and shut them down or made them turn it off temporarily, they were talking about a couple of the other foreign countries. I think Japan and one of the other European countries literally just cut them off.
China did.
Yeah.
China set up a firewall. So we're trying to get cut off anybody.
The biggest firewall.
The biggest firewall on the planet is the firewall of China.
The Great Firewall.
The Great Firewall of China. And in fact, they shut down SiteFinder now. That's another issue with it. SiteFinder wasn't available in Chinese, so if you speak Chinese,
China for one.
that's not going to be really useful to you. Now,
There were other countries that did the same thing, though.
yes, there are. This is one thing, though. I mean, in terms of the language issue is not something that I think we should focus on.
Hey, it's two cameras too.
Whoa! Like a moral.
I mean,
The technical issues, everybody, order in the court.
I am sorry. Everybody booze up and run!
I don't want to focus on technical issues like what language the website is on, because the thing is that VeriSign will respond to those technical issues. They'll find a way to manage them. It's not about the technical issues, and that's why they go to ICANN and they say, we can talk about the technical concerns, but we can't talk about the political concerns. the fundamental issue here is who gets to make decisions about what the DNS system consists of. It's not about whether or not VeriSign's solution works in some technical way or what technical problems it causes. It's about who has the power here. Is it something that we collectively share? Is it something that's democratic? Or is it something that's owned by a particular individual who gets to make unilateral decisions?
Let Microsoft do it.
Great idea.
Doesn't VeriSign have some links to the SSL system?
Yes, they do. A lot of their business is actually doing with telecom companies. Their internet business is very limited. I don't know much more than that. I don't know. Do you want to talk about it?
I don't have anything on the top of my head.
They've been selling OSS systems, like operational support management systems, to the telecom industry, the wireless industry. They're very into that stuff. It's kind of strange. I think that they see a convergence between the internet and like the voice telephone system, and they want to build inroads into the voice providers because they think they can leverage their knowledge of the internet to bring those companies into the future. I mean, they're not stupid people, and they're doing some kind of interesting stuff in that space. But I mean, unfortunately, I used to believe that this wasn't true, and it is in fact true that whether or not you're equal or good, and whether or not you're smart or stupid, are totally they're totally exclusive things. They have no relationship with each other at all. I don't know. Somebody might disagree with me there, but I don't know. That's the conclusion I'm coming to. Unfortunately, somebody over here had their hand up.
Originally, I guess you understand that Network Solutions was started by a bunch of three-letter organizations.
Yeah.
Mention that?
I mean, okay, so this guy brought up a point that Network Solutions was in fact a government entity. It started out, I don't know the whole history in extreme detail, if anyone exactly knows it, I'd like to know it. But, I mean, they were part of the, whole DARPA. I mean, DARPA funded the internet, and this is the military research guys. These guys do research science for the Army. And they developed this network, and they ran the DNS system, and then it got handed off to Network Solutions, which was originally owned by SAIC, which is a corporation that it's mostly owned by its employees, but it has basically a very, very, very cozy relationship with the CIA and a couple of other, I mean, the reality is that the acorn did not fall far from the tree. DARPA provides a lot of funding to SAIC. I mean, this is really sort of a corporation which is very much a part of the military-industrial complex, and eventually it got spun off independently, and then it was bought by VeriSign. I really don't think that VeriSign is closely connected to the government anymore. Most of the people on the board, if you track them, they're kind of Silicon Valley, kind of .com people. They do a lot of investing in various companies that provide network infrastructure in that space. There may be a couple of people that are involved in government that are still left. I wouldn't be surprised if the SAIC still had some portion of it, but it's a very interesting question to try to determine exactly who owns this stuff and what influence they have. And also ask yourself, what other companies do these people own? What do they have a piece of? Because if you're not in a position to not buy products from VeriSign, maybe you're in a position to not buy products from another company, and maybe the people that own VeriSign also own that company. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are many ways to put pressure on the situation. It's probably useful to go look up who is the board of this company, what are they involved with.
Theyrule.net is it. Look them up on the website, theyrule.net.
Theyrule.net. Interesting. I'll check it out. Theyrule.net apparently has some details.
There's people who sit on multiple boards for multiple large corporations and where a lot of power resides in America.
Stanton Slavos, the CEO of VeriSign, was listed in Forbes' list of the 50 most powerful people in the world.
Isn't the problem here really that we've taken this idea, and okay, now this is bullshit anyways, but the idea was that it was all spread out and the internet was indestructible because you could take one thing, and we've taken DNS, which now we all are all dependent upon, and putting all our eggs in, 15 baskets.
Totally valid. Very difficult problem to solve, though. I mean, if you're going to have one name that's unique, that references one particular website, you're going to have some sort of central authority to work that out. The only way to get rid of central authority from the equation is to have a situation where multiple people can be called Google. And when you attempt to access Google, you get to select from the list. And then you get into this question about who gets to be at the top of the list and who gets to be at the bottom. It's a really interesting problem. And this is definitely something for us to think about. We're all geeks. We all can go and implement interesting solutions to problems. This is a really important, really hard problem, and if you can find a way to run an internet where you can find what you're looking for, but nobody's allowed to own a word, that would be extremely useful. And it's definitely something we're talking about, we're thinking about.
How about doing like you said, New Zealand, basically come up with the word is multiple used, provided as an index service to everything that's used.
How does that work?
Government control thing.
Okay.
But you can't do it in global TLD unless you have a company in charge. The result of what we're doing right now. That's all companies that can say you have money on people. Power trucks, absolutely. Yes, power trucks.
So you guys are so interested in VeriSign. I think Evil is 1,000 times more problematic.
I agree, but what the fact of both of your statements is that the people who are on the internet and the average person, they don't give a fuck. They want to go to site function. They want to vote, and they don't care how it works, and they wouldn't understand the code of this.
That's the thing.
But big bitch, they call your tech support and they call you on the phone and say, why does the company
Let me respond to that.
spam mail work?
People are fucking apathetic, absolutely. People do not understand, and they don't give a fuck, and they don't want to give a fuck, because giving a fuck involves thinking, and thinking is apparently difficult. So, what I suggest is that you guys you're all leaders, okay? The reason you're at this con, you're thinking about all this super advanced computer stuff, you guys are all leaders. And there are people, regardless of, what you may think, who fucking look up to you, and, they follow what you say with respect to this stuff. When you say, you should use SSH, they listen. They pay attention. And, this is one of the most important things you can do with respect to things like this that you disagree with, is try to educate the people around you who don't necessarily understand them. And say, hey, you should think about it this way. Kind of be proactive and talk about it with people. Because, you can spread the wealth, and people will follow you because you are the leaders. You wouldn't be here if you weren't.
Educating the general public is absolutely key while you're still a friend of mine and a few other people in the free went through the legislative clause or chair trying to discuss super DMC and shit.
Awesome.
All the senators there, everyone just sitting up in the front, they're just old farts, and the guy who had been paid $8 million a second or whatever to go speak to the recording industry, he was up there just spouting off the same bullshit, he went up twice or something like that, and they were all like, okay, we understand, they had all been preaching it before, and when we had our guys show up there, they were all farting around and talking to each other, so they didn't give a shit.
What the issue is there's no accountability.
How's this going to affect people?
I mean, you guys had a very powerful effect. I mean, the reality is that they were going to fucking train that shit straight through. I mean, it was going to be bang. It was on the floor, it was passed, it was good. And the reality is that you guys had a very significant effect in terms of slowing it down. It's still kind of on the table, but, I mean, going to the legislature and speaking intelligently about this stuff and being consistent has had a tremendous effect. And we all owe you guys a debt of gratitude for working on it.
Don't give me any credit, I just kind of sat there.
It's very important, I mean, and, all of us are in a position to do it. Sorry.
I think the most important thing we can do is make quote-unquote normal people understand this. I personally am probably one of the few. I'm not as deep into this as most people are, but I care and I want to understand. And I think it's my responsibility to make other people want to care and want to understand by showing them that guys sitting over there could go and steal your vote. Literally, some guy in his room at University of Tennessee Knoxville could steal your vote and be able to change your vote. And if you use that terminology, people will start to care.
Okay, so it's 9:01, so I gotta shut the hell up. And plus, I'm starting to sober up because it's been an hour since I've had anything to sleep. So thank you for listening to me. I hope that I was